just to imagine other possibilities. It takes us out of that constricted state. It takes us out of the lockdown to the one story, and it expands us. It opens us up. And when it opens us up, we let go of the one story.
When you left without a plan B, which a lot of people don't get to have plan Bs or not able to, you didn't really have time to think about what was going on or feel your way or process it. You had to fight to survive. And that path is one that a lot of us are familiar with. It's a path that people are working through, whether they're my age, 25 or 55 with, a full family at that point. What I'm curious about, and you start to talk about this in this blog post that you wrote, is starting to reimagine and try on other possibilities to be able to start to think of alternatives of alternative stories that you could tell yourself about these circumstances that you find yourself in.
What happens is when we are threatened, when we feel a sense of threat, and threat is to our well-being. It could be our identity. It could be our survival. It could be our physical being. It could be our emotional being. It can be any of these things that the moment that we experience threat, we are wired. We're designed. Our nervous system is designed to lock into something. Now, if you think about this from an evolutionary perspective or survival perspective, and it finds that safety or security in a certainty, even if the certainty is wrong, it doesn't matter. It's like targeting. We got to get a target. We got to get a bullseye. And that's what we're going to focus on because that's a matter of life or death. And it makes sense from an evolutionary perspective. So let's go back hundreds of thousands of years ago when we're walking this planet with big animals, dinosaurs. If we sat and entertained 10 or 15 possibilities, we might get eaten in the meantime. So our nervous system wants to lock down something very quickly. Now, fast forward to modern times, and we're not being chased by dinosaurs or saber-toothed tigers. Now what happens is this becomes an emotional experience or an experience in our identity or our survival from the perspective of food, water, shelter, money. We do exactly the same thing. And so when we get to that place of threat, we're going to get very constricted and very targeted on this is the answer, I'm certain. So in my example, when this was happening at this job, I locked in to two things. I locked into I'm not enough. And that was a story I held on to. And I locked into, holy shit, I got to get this figured out and I got to do it right now. So I got very constricted into these two things. And that's where I stayed. And I actually stayed there for years, to be quite honest. And so what we need to be able to do, because what happens is when we get constricted and locked into the one story, it doesn't serve us because what does it do? It keeps us stuck in the very narratives that are causing us pain and turmoil. It keeps us trapped. It keeps us trapped in the story. And if we don't have an awareness, we buy into it as if that's the true story, period. End of story. That's it. And then that creates a set of emotions, which creates some drive towards a decision. And you can see how that plays out. And many of us do that. We've experienced it personally. I'm sure you've had friends who you've heard have the same story over and over and over again, and they believe it as truth, and they get locked into that story, and they don't consider anything else for that moment. And it keeps you stuck. And so what do you do to get out of that? First of all, you have to recognize that you're doing that. That's the first thing. You got to name the experience. And you name the experience by going, like, for example, in my situation, I remember going through this. It was like, okay, this situation is activating a story, a very old story for me. And that this situation is activating my narrative of not being good enough. Okay. Now I could have stayed there, and what would have come from it would have been pretty predictable because we get stuck in those patterns. Instead, what you do is you name it, then you take a step back and go, let me see if there's other possibilities. Let me imagine what else it could be. And so we'll use my example, to illustrate this is I could have stayed stuck in the shame of not being good enough, or not being valued or appreciated, right? I could have stayed there. Instead, what I did was I took a step back and said, okay, what could be all the other things that could be going on right now besides not being good enough? Well, one of those things was The reality is this hospital needed to cut some corners. I was a corner they were going to cut, that it wasn't personal. Even if they didn't go about it in the nicest way or in a way that honored my service to the hospital, nonetheless, it wasn't personal. They had to make budget cuts. So that's an option. Another option is this was the door. This was the knock on the door. I wasn't going to open the door and leave on my own. I just wasn't. I was too scared to go out on my own. And so maybe life was delivering me a gift by knocking on the door and saying, hey, you got to go. So there's another possibility. So it wasn't right for me. It was time for me to go. Another option is there may be other possibilities for me. There may be something out there waiting for me. And so the point of doing this is not to land on the right answer, because we don't even know what the right answer is half the time. What it does is just to imagine other possibilities. It takes us out of that constricted state. It takes us out of the lockdown to the one story, and it expands us. It opens us up. And when it opens us up and we consider other possibilities, we let go of the one story. It softens a little bit, and it doesn't have the chokehold that it does on us. So that's really important, because what it does is it's almost like it disarms or it soothes the nervous system by thinking of other options.
That's interesting to me. Part of it almost feels wrong to me. Like I feel like I crave the certainty of knowing the true story, like finding out what the truth is. And I will do this like endlessly. I think I'll do the part at least where I think of all the possible options.
Uh-huh.
But what I struggle with is what to do next, because I think when I'm thinking about all these possible options, I am doing it to assess which one feels like it's the most true, and then I will cling to that because it feels the most valid to me. And I think when I do that, I mean, it's a pattern. Like the things that I cling to that are the most true are the ones that resonate most closely with the stories I tell myself most often, So the story, if I were to go through that whole list too, like say I have been laid off. So when I was laid off, a couple of years ago, I might think the same things, like I'm not good enough, or there are just real budget concerns right now, or somehow I failed, or this is going to be the push I need to do my own thing. I'm doing that, trying to find which one is the correct one. And I usually inevitably end up at the one that reinforces my old stories of not being enough or feeling like a failure. Like I could say, yeah, there were budget concerns, but they chose me because I was the one that was the worst, or I was the one that wasn't good enough. The other thing that I think you're saying is, not only is this not about finding the correct story, it's not either really about finding the story that feels the best to you, or feels the most good, or just trying to like pull the wool over your eyes. It's more so just kind of creating this neutral list, is maybe what I'm understanding it as, like kind of mapping out possibilities. But I think what I'm struggling with now, and maybe what other people might be thinking about too, is once you have expanded this set of what this could mean for you, like what do you do next so you don't just end up landing back in old territory?
That's a great question. And you bring up something that I think is really important to highlight, and that is the idea of a lot of times we'll gravitate to familiarity. And I want to make this distinction. I think this is a really important distinction in our experiences. Familiar feels safe, okay? Because we know it. Even if it feels yucky, we know it. And so we're drawn to familiarity just as much as we're drawn to certainty. And so sometimes what'll happen is we'll confuse that with what's true for us. And so I'm glad that you brought that up, because that is different than getting to the truth for us. And we go about it a little bit differently. And so, like, for example, I listed these possibilities, right? And one of the things to do is to actually test it in your nervous system. That's going to be the truth teller. The truth teller is going to be your nervous system, because our mind is going to tell you this thing is truthful because it's just familiar. I'm used to this. And it feels like a comfortable pair of shoes. And so I think that's the right answer for me. Yet what we're not doing is we're not actually testing it to see if it is really the truth for us. And the best way to test that is to go back to the nervous system, ironically. And what you do is you take in something, like, for example, we'll use my example again at the hospital. If I take in, okay, I'm going to take in the experience of not being good enough. I was going to be let go because I'm not good enough. I'm just not good enough. I didn't, I failed. I'm a failure. And I take that in, and I actually take it into my body and allow it to kind of settle in my body. What I will notice is that my nervous system, like, it'll get activated. Like, I'll feel things like I may feel this constriction in my chest, or like I can't breathe, or I feel like there's a lump in my throat. I'll feel really kind of very yucky kinds of sensations in the body, things that don't feel good. Okay. So I'll make note of that. Then I will take in another experience. I'll take another possibility. It's time for me to go. It was time for me to go. So I take that in. It was time for me to go. And what I notice is when I say that, my body does almost the opposite. I feel like from my heart, I feel an opening. Like, all of a sudden, it's like, when I feel this opening, it's like, oh, that actually feels good. That does feel good. Another one is, it's just budget cuts. It's just budget cuts. I'll take it in. It's just budget cuts. And what I notice when I say it's just budget cuts, I don't feel anything. Like, there's a neutrality. And so that's a great way to test it. And so for me, what I would do is, even though there's still a lot of healing around this, I would go, okay, when I go to the place of not being good enough, my nervous system tells me that is not really the truth. My nervous system is getting constricted. It's shutting down. It's doing these things to protect me. But when I consider the other option, like, it's time for me to go, I feel this release. I feel a flow. I feel a relief. I feel light. The energy dissipates instead of coming in and constricting. And so your body, your nervous system, is a great way to test this out.
I love that. And I'm just thinking, if I were experiencing this, like, what do you do if none of these stories are telling yourself feel good?
Say more.
There might be some people out there, for example, I mean, we're talking about getting laid off in particular. There might be some people that when they hear it was time for me to go, or when they tell themselves that, they don't feel that feeling of release. Maybe it was a job they loved, or it was a place that they felt really at home, or maybe it was a partner that was really out really well, and then you've since, broken up. I feel like sometimes when, especially if you're in like crisis mode or you're deep in this feeling, it can be so hard to find any alternative that doesn't feel shitty.
Sure, sure. Well, you're actually bringing up something that I think is really important, and that is, when we have these kinds of experiences, sometimes it's not just as simple as, I'm struggling with this not good enough stuff. It can be a suitcase packed with stuff, right? And so what I often recommend in those situations, when you said, okay, it still doesn't feel good, is what you want to do is, when you're testing this out, you want to go into your body. And when you go into your body and you say that thing, sometimes what'll happen is there'll be something else there. So, for example, let's take my example of, it was time for me to go. So I could go in and go, oh, it's time for me to go. And I can feel just a momentary release. And then boom, right behind it is fear. Like, I can go, oh my God, there's fear. Okay, this may not be the right decision. I'm feeling fear. No, what you do is you go, okay, let me go into the fear. Let me just be with the fear. I don't need to change it. I don't need to fix it. It's not a problem. It's just showing me something. So if I go into the fear, it could be, I'm really afraid. I'm afraid, yes, it is time for me to go. And this is not a good place for me, but I'm also afraid that I can't do it on my own. So then you have another thing. You have something there to work with. Okay, well, let me go into that fear. Let me try on some things around the fear. Well, what can I do? Like, what's been my experience about, making it on my own? What can I lean into? What are the possibilities there? So if you think about it, it's almost layered, and each of the layers you can go in with the same inquiry, and you're just pulling back the different layers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I feel like that's a lot more aligned with at least the way I experience these things, especially that, maybe momentary feeling that gets quickly overshadowed by all the bad shit. Like, I think this comes up for me all the time where I'll be feeling, I'll try on these other possibilities and maybe something will feel good, but then very quickly my brain finds the way for it to feel bad, or, finds the way for, okay, I have freedom now, but also that means I have no stability. Also, that means I don't know where my money's going to come from, whatever X, Y, and Z that looks like. So I feel like that is much more closely aligned. And I like that task almost that you can do to occupy your brain when you're feeling that way, of just neutrally kind of turning over each of these feelings and seeing what they reveal to you. I know we're kind of coming up towards the end of this week's conversation, but I'm wondering if you can give a little foreshadow, a little bit of a sneak peek for next week to talk about, once you've done this assessment, once you've tried these other sets of possibilities, what can you do to begin to take action forward out of this place that you're feeling right now?
It's a great question. And so we've named it. We've imagined other possibilities and then we've tested the possibilities, right? And then the last step in this process, which we will get into more in our next discussion, is then you get into action. You consciously choose whatever option you believe best serves you. So that's what's really important, because this is where a sense of agency comes in. That's where our sense of power kicks in as well. Is we go through this, we get through it, and then we consciously choose our path. And that would be the final step in the process.
I like the idea of being able to be conscious about it at least.
Right. Right. Well, and that's really important, because think about this. We all have had the experience of choosing things unconsciously, right? We've had experiences of getting in defaults, getting into our default mode and making decisions from that default mode that we're not even really conscious of.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I think, the kind of experience we've been naming throughout this journey is living in a story, basically, and the decisions that you make based off of that story. And these stories are real and legitimate, and they come from very real experiences that either you or your family or people that you know or your culture or community have experienced. And at the same time, those stories might not be true. Those stories might not be serving you. Those stories might not be creating the most powerful reality for you. And so I think what I'm walking away with from this week is just being able to open up the field towards other possibilities and other alternatives when things get tough, like when things get shitty, to be able to try and like what other ways this could feel like, or what other things that this could mean to you.
Right, exactly. And I'd like to add something to that is, what we have a tendency to do is when we are confronted with a situation and are lock into a story and our nervous system gets activated, a lot of times that's where people stop, right? Is they stop in that story, they're activated, they feel helpless, hopeless, powerless, and they feel stuck right there. And what I'm offering is an alternative to this is, one is to recognize the way that we're, like this is our owner's manual, so to speak, to recognize, oh, this is what happens, and to be able to use it to our benefit instead of our disadvantage. When we get locked into a story and we stay stuck in an activated nervous system and we spin our wheels in that story and our nervous system, it doesn't serve us. Something that comes to mind as I talk about this is like being in a maze, and you can go down different corridors in the maze and go, I kind of wonder what's down this corridor. I wonder what I'm going to find. Is if you could have that same kind of approach with the things that we deal with in our life, it would be really helpful, where there's a sense of, oh, what's down here? What do I notice? What do I sense in my body? Oh, I'm going to see what this is like. Oh, I'm going to go down this corridor. Sometimes we take things entirely too seriously, and it actually keeps us locked into the thing that we're trying to get away from. And so it's important to really look at this as this is just the system. I'm going to work in my system. I recognize the things that happen, and I'm going to approach them from a place of curiosity and neutrality so that it opens up my line of possibility and inquiry.
That's great. I love it. Thank you so much for sharing all these tips. I feel like these are things I can't wait to start to try on myself, especially with opening up the field of possibilities towards alternatives of what these things could mean for you. I like the idea of just being a little bit more playful with this and being able to be curious and go down these corridors and see what lies there for you rather than taking it too seriously. So thank you for giving that to us. I'm excited for our next conversation where we can begin to talk about taking and choosing the best path forward out of this place to begin to start to rewrite the story that you're telling yourself. So thank you for all the help today.
Thank you.